Brothers, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for our 2023 virtual housing conference. My name is Dionysius Protopapadakis. I'm the Senior Director of Graduate Engagement for Phi Gamma Delta. And I look forward to working with you all in your roles on the House Corporation and beyond. And thank you again for taking time out of your Saturday to join us for our virtual housing conference. Today, we're going to cover quite a few items, and the structure, if you all have joined us in the past, does look a little different than previous housing conferences. Some of the major highlights are, first, we'll give you an update. John Ziza will give you an update on the current status of the Housing Advisory Committee and projects going on. We're then going to jump to a message from our Executive Director, Rob Caudill, on an update on the fraternity and strategic priorities and the direction we're headed. We're going to have a quick update on the Fraternity Sorority Political Action Committee and the Educational Foundation, particularly how both those programs can affect and the impact they can have on your House Corporation as we move forward. And then lastly, we have a number of educational breakout sessions created for you all today. I do just want to take a moment to say thank you first and foremost to the members of the Housing Advisory Committee for their assistance in putting together this program. I will also take a moment to thank our conference partners and our presenters for today. Upper Crust Food Service and Columns Fundraising being our preferred partners for the Housing Advisory Committee and Phi Gamma Delta, but also our other presenters from Omega Phi, Holmes Murphy, and Alpha Fraternity Management on our various educational sessions. The conference schedule, we've already addressed one technical difficulty, so I appreciate you all bearing with me this morning. But ultimately, brothers, once we wrap up this opening session, we're going to jump into our breakouts. We have 5 breakouts scheduled for you on a variety of topics, and then we're going to take some time at the very end to address any questions and close out the program and have an open discussion as needed. So brothers, without further ado, I'll introduce John Ziza, Ohio 1978 Chairman of the Housing Advisory Committee.
Good morning, afternoon, brothers, partners, and presenters. Thank you for attending our conference today. I think we have a wonderful agenda prepared for you all, and I hope that, that you interact and get the most out of the session. Dio, do you have control of the slides or do I? One of the questions that I put on the slide is, why have I been placed here? And as an undergraduate, you may answer that by something like pursuing knowledge or achieving wisdom. Well, in this scenario, you either volunteered or were coerced or both. And you're here for a purpose. You're here to manage your chapter houses. And if you're not thinking about it this way, I need for you all to think about your house corporations as businesses, and you need to think about yourself and your group as landlords. You're competing against other landlords on your campus, whether they're professional and have apartment complexes and condominiums and properties such as that, and also some amateurs, if you will, pseudo amateurs like us who are managing other house corporations. So I need for you to put your landlord hat on, if you will, and think about the priorities that you might consider as a landlord. So first of all, you might think that the top priorities, if you have a property, is safety and security. You want everybody coming to your property to be safe. You don't want anybody falling. You want to make sure all your security systems are in place and functioning properly. You want to make sure that it's an environment where people can feel comfortable. You want it to be a healthy environment. You want the air quality to be good. You want the food, if you're serving food, to be good. You want it to be a healthy environment. Also for people visiting, you want them to feel comfortable. You know, you've got to be competitive in the marketplace. So you have to do your own kind of marketing, both to your undergraduates and to those students who are considering participating in the fraternity. You need to be competitive with the other fraternities and also the commercial property owners who you're competing with on your campuses. And what does that mean? It means that the property needs to be maintained. You have to have capital funding and plans, CapEx planning, so that your property maintains that competitive edge, if you will. And you're a businessman, you know, you're running this business, so it's got to be profitable. So you've got to develop a model in which you not only can pay your bills, but you can put money aside for CapEx funding in the future. So as you think about the different elements of today's conference, think about it in terms of you being a landlord and how you can best manage this property. But I also want to share with you that, you know, this House Corporation work is a partnership. The Housing Advisory Committee really wants to be your partner and help you be successful. The National Fraternity doesn't have a lot of structure to support House corporations aside from the Housing Advisory Committee. And we really want to continue to build and develop and nourish those relationships. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. And some of the feedback that we hear from House corporations is they feel like they're on an island and they don't have a lot of help. And again, I want to reiterate that you're not alone. We're here for you. We want to help you. We want you to be successful. We have some great resources. We're not going to have all the answers, but we'll commit to finding the answers for you. Dio, next slide. So what does the Housing Advisory Committee do? So our job is to help you promote competitive housing so that you can be winners on campus. We develop programming, whether that be the event today, the webinars that we have on a quarterly basis, and other activities to support the work that you do. We also provide support to IHQ staff and to House corporations. We probably get 1 to 2 calls every week from different House corporations on issues that they're having, and we're happy to help. We serve at the pleasure of the Archons and staff. We get our direction from the Archons. Rob, most importantly, directs the project work that we do. And our sole focus is House corporations, much the same as your sole focus should be on the House. Again, coming back to the landlord model, if you're doing things like managing a pig dinner, if you're managing newsletters, if you're organizing alumni events, then those activities may be outside the scope of what a landlord should be doing. And you should seek other resources, whether that be BCA or other members of your organization to help with those kinds of things so that you can focus on your houses. And if you need help getting resources, again, we can be a liaison for you to IHQ and help you to get those resources where you need them. The final thing we do, and we get more requests than you might imagine from undergraduate chapters interested in starting a House corporation. And in those situations, we gently guide them to IHQ and to their section leaders and their PLs if they have one to help guide them in that direction. Next slide. So the Housing Advisory Committee is made up of a bunch of great brothers, all of whom are currently on House corporations or former House corporation members, as well as we have several professionals that are real estate, commercial specialists, lawyers. We have a couple brothers, J.B. Gall and Mark Wilkinson, who are professionals in the fraternity business. We have other brothers who are professional property managers and property developers. So we have a great breadth and depth of skills in our group and can help in many areas. Next slide, Dio. So our calendar remains the same this year as it has in the past. Besides the annual housing conference, we have 3 town halls a year, 2 that are vendor directed based on your input and feedback, and 1 that is a roundtable town hall. And that's a really popular event. It's a chance for you all to talk about your successes and your opportunity areas and share those stories with others and get feedback from other chapters in your same situation. And as well, we'll continue our semi-monthly newsletters that we've been distributing. Next slide. Our priorities for this year include developing the House Director job description and training. The job description work is actually done, and we're posting that shortly on the website. We're currently developing the syllabus for the training program, and the expectation is this year we will have a training program in place for a House Director. Now that's going to be a generic training program, as the House Director role looks different across different chapters. But it'll be a good start for anybody interested in wanting to become a House Director. I've been working over the last several months with Dave Schreck, who's been a silent partner, if you will, on the Housing Advisory Committee. And we're working to develop House Corporation standards. And as I talked about earlier, safety and security being one of the key elements of a landlord would be the first area that we tackle. And we'll be developing programming and training, and we're going to roll it out to Dave's sections and test it and get feedback on how the training is received, and have those sections report on their annual reports the results of their security programs that they've implemented. And from there, we'll develop other programming on health and competitive environments and repairs, maintenance, renovations, things like that, all the standards necessary for you all to have successful houses. We've begun reaching out to each of the House Corporation presidents. And if you haven't been solicited, you will be soon. Our intent is to collect meaningful information from all the House corporations, not only put that in a database, but to begin to develop relationships with all the House corporations. We've actually broken down the House corporations into sections, if you will, using the NCAA groupings. So we have a Pac-12 group, we have a Big Ten group, we have an ACC group, we have an SEC group, on and on and on. And the idea behind that is those chapters are likely to have similar characteristics. And our plan is to have regional meetings with those groups so that they can share locally, if you will, or regionally, their successes and challenges, because those are going to tend to be very similar in nature. As I said, as we collect this data from you all, our plan is to develop a corporate database. Right now, we're using spreadsheets, which aren't very effective. And the intent is having the data out there so not only you can see it, but you'll have the ability to update it so that we don't have to solicit you every time to keep your information current. In addition, we'll continue our programming and support. And to that end, you're going to hear Rob talk today about what's happening in the fraternity, specifically about the new model and how it's going to impact all of the chapters. For the first time, we're bringing in Ben Robinson and Kevin Mitchelson to talk. Ben's going to talk about Phi Gamma Delta Educational Foundation and the kinds of things that they do that can help your House corporation. And Kevin Mitchelson, he represents Phi Gamma Delta on FSPAC in Washington, D.C. And he's going to talk to you about the kinds of initiatives that PAC is working on that can help you be more successful as a House corporation. Next slide, Dio. So in closing, I really want to tell you that we're here for you. We want to help you. Please use us. There are plenty of resources out at Phi Gamma Delta org under graduates in housing. We have a lot of best practices and guides and tools that you can use. All of our webinars are there, including one that we did last fall that you want to pay attention to. It was for Pipeburst Pro, which is a technology that can mitigate water damage in your house. It's a learning technology that you can control remotely, and it can detect based on your experience, your water experience, if it believes you're having a water event, and it can turn the water off at your house and provide you with the ability either locally or remotely to turn it back on. That's a pretty powerful tool. Also, if you have any questions, either during the conference or after the conference, please feel free anytime to send an email to housing@phigam.org. Once again, thanks for joining the conference. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you participate, and please let us know how we can help you. Dio, back to you.
Thank you, John. Now, brothers, as I transition, I do want to extend Rob's apologies for not being able to be with us live this afternoon. However, Rob has put together a very strong message to provide you all with updates on the direction of the fraternity and the new model in particular. So without further ado, brothers.
Brothers, good afternoon and welcome to the 2023 Housing Conference. On behalf of the fraternity staff and Archons, I first want to say thank you for being here today, and thank you to the Housing Advisory Committee for their work in organizing today's event. But more importantly, brothers, I want to say thank you for the work that you do to support housing for undergraduate members of Phi Gamma Delta. My goal today is to give you an update as to what's happening in the fraternity. Obviously, there are some big news, some big happenings, and to give you a general sense of where the state of Phi Gamma Delta really sits today. I couldn't open one of these up without giving you a few items by the numbers. So as it sits today, or as of the end of last month, January 31st, Phi Gamma Delta had just around 9,000 undergraduate members on 143 campuses across North America. Now, how does that compare? Just so you're aware, at our peak, we sat just shy of 12,000 members on 167 campuses back in 2018. The good news, though, as we compare ourselves to last year or 2022 at the same date, our new members are up about 5%, our new initiates up about 10% at this point in the year. Many brothers ask, how does Phi Gamma Delta compare to some of our peers? Well, at the end of the last academic year, or about June 30th, 2022, Phi Gamma Delta ranked 8th among our peers in total undergraduate membership. That's 8 out of more than 70 men's groups, and around 14th in terms of number of undergraduate chapters. A few more stats for you. As of today, we believe we have about 136,000 living graduate brothers across the world, and surpassed 206,000 all-time initiates into our fraternity. Beyond numbers, though, this is certainly a year of celebration. This year, on May 1st, marks our 175th anniversary. I certainly invite you to help us to celebrate this year. Be on the lookout for more communications on ways you can do so and share those stories with us, and certainly learn more at www.phigam.org/175th anniversary. Another important milestone is that in 2023, Phi Gamma Delta celebrates 100 years as an international fraternity. This year, we celebrate the centennial anniversary of our Tau Kappa chapter at the University of Toronto, which will be celebrated, was first celebrated back in November of this past year, but will continue to be celebrated in April at a gala in Toronto. I'd invite you to reach out and learn more if you're interested. So, brothers, I assume that you're generally aware of some of the significant and historic amendments and happenings from the 174th Ecclesia back in August of 2022. I think it's important to understand a little bit about some of the context leading up to that event, some of what was happening in Phi Gamma Delta and on our campuses leading up to the introduction of some historic and I believe will be really meaningful amendments to our laws that change how we operate in the future. First, as we think about it, there are a lot of changing dynamics as it relates to campuses themselves, their enrollments, how students seem to perceive the world. Those are things that have been starting to change, and like many things, were exacerbated through the COVID era, but we only expect even more to come in the next several years. And I'll point out too, brothers, that some of the information, some of the numbers I'm going to point out to you may not be overly surprising, but we only began to really learn some of the data beginning about 3 or 4 years ago. First, and I think highly important just to understand, for many years now, we have seen a steady and more recently a significant drop in overall enrollment, but particularly male enrollment on college campuses. It's a generally accepted number that the ratio of female to male students on campuses today is about 60% to 40%. And that gap is only growing. In fact, those numbers were about equal more than a decade ago, and that gap has grown even more and expected to grow even more in the coming years. On top of that, we've got to understand that there is more going on with college enrollments themselves. Some campuses have started to see this in the past few years. Some have thus far been immune, but it has been discussed in higher education for several years and is more so today, understood that there is going to be what is being described as an enrollment cliff. Now, cliff might be a little bit of a sharp term. It's not exactly a gradual, but not quite a cliff-like decline. But that enrollment cliff is predicted by birth rates alone. And what's expected, and again, has already started to show up a little bit in the last couple of years, is that we should expect to see some significant drops in enrollment peaking in about 2029. Now, brothers, that makes sense again if you think just around birth rates alone and how the recession in the late 2000s impacted those. Another interesting number just to understand and as background as to some of the changes going on within the fraternity. Again, a generally understood number, this varies significantly campus to campus. Less than 10% of undergraduate men join a fraternity. Less than 10% of men join a fraternity on a college campus. So we've got to ask the question, what about the other 90%? Now, there is some anecdotal and peer data that helps us suggest that, while chapters might remain strong now and in recent times, we continue to see some of the men that we see as always joiners. So those always joiners tend to be the men who are going to go through formal recruitment, going to show up pretty much no matter what. And of course, this is not universal, but some of the information we also understand about those always joiners is that they're the men who might be joining for some of the wrong reasons. They're the men who might be joining because they might be most drawn to things like the social life. They might be there for reasons beyond some of our desired outcomes and desired reasons to have men who truly align with our values and really want to see and have a really robust undergraduate experience. As we understand that information a little bit more, we recognize a need to really find different ways to attract and retain those men who aren't just here for the party. So if we ask ourselves, what about the other 90%? There's a lot more that we're beginning to understand in recent years. First is that we know that there's about somewhere between 30 and 40% of men who consider joining but do not join a fraternity because of the perception they have. They say, it's not for me. I don't want to be exposed to what I assume or perceive or maybe experience in the way of hazing and alcohol misuse. Now, as a slight aside, the men who maybe consider joining but ultimately don't are often the type of men we attract when starting a new chapter. But beyond that 35 to 40% out there who consider joining but ultimately don't, there's another 26% who never consider joining due to that same type of perception. And the primary driver there, the biggest thing that they tell researchers is, I don't want to be hazed. I don't want to be hazed. Of course, there are other factors that we have to consider as we think about what's going on with college enrollments and how that impacts fraternity membership. Certainly cost is a much bigger factor in higher education today. Higher education inflation has gone through the roof over the last several decades and has a lot of men and women asking, what's the real value in higher education? And we have to wonder how that impacts the fraternity proposition and the costs associated with it. There are other factors as to why men don't join. Some of those include concerns for academics. Well, we can prove that that's not the case, but we won't harp on that one. The interesting piece that I find next is we think about the reasons men don't join beyond the perception, beyond cost reasons, beyond concerns with their academics. The next one in line is simply, I didn't know how to sign up, right? I didn't know how to sign up. That indicates some concerning numbers as it relates to a reliance on formal recruitment and the ways we go about identifying and attracting men to ultimately join our chapters. So brothers, I give you all this as background because this is some of the background that the Archons and the fraternity of a whole has been considering for some time as we started to think about how we shape the membership process going forward. And if there's a conclusion to draw, or an conclusion that the fraternity has drawn in recent years, it's that until we show something different, until we do something different, we will not attract the fraction of those 90% of men that we need to survive and thrive in the coming decade, as we expect those enrollments to decline. And in some cases, on some campuses, the possibility of those men joining decreasing significantly. Beyond the numbers, though, there's some other things we've got to consider, right? Student expectations are different today and continue to be a little bit different. I like to describe today, and especially among college students, as we are in a subscription-based society, right? Young people today in particular like the ability to turn something on and turn it off when it's convenient for them, or maybe put another way, when they see or do not see value. And I think that is starting to really play into some of the anecdotal issues we've seen with the continued engagement of our juniors and seniors. You know, of course, I've already brought up the growing concerns over costs and the value of higher education, and the expectation that we have to continue to show that value proposition as to why fraternity is worth it, not just an investment of dollars, but also an investment of time. We recognize and believe that going forward, we need to constantly show the value add of the fraternity experience. And certainly another big piece of background and some of the environmental scanning that has happened over the last several years and leading up to the implementation of what we call our new model. We've got to recognize that for more than 60 years, and that's 60 years documented, certainly could be more, the fraternity has identified the elimination of hazing as a significant, if not strategic, priority. We have records going back to Ecclesiae back in the early 1960s, where laws against hazing were only strengthened. Addresses to the Ecclesia body identified the need to eliminate it as significant, but yet 60 years later, we continue to see some concerns erupt. In 2017, if some of you might recall, the Archons commissioned a committee which ultimately was called Project Zero. Its charge was to generate and present additional ways to enhance member education and prevent hazing. Now, that group did its work over the course of about 12 or 18 months, and ultimately many themes and recommendations emerged. One of the most significant, or one of the themes and recommendations that really took hold became an initiative of the fraternity several years ago, which was to find, pilot, and deploy innovative approaches to becoming a Phi Gamma. That ultimately began to shape the primary components of our new model for voting courageous leaders. So, brothers, we have to recognize that this need to eliminate hazing, this need to do our best to prevent hazing from creeping into our work, into our chapters. We have to recognize that it is significant. Although more than 60 years of efforts to combat hazing through educational and accountability have been in place, those items alone are not enough. And that might be evidenced just in numbers since about 2018. And the fraternity has lost 16 chapters to hazing alone since our peak of membership in 2018. We've also got to consider some of the other dynamics amongst our campuses and our peers, which have been making significant moves in the past several years to shorten the permitted pledge periods allowed on campuses, and in some of our peers' cases to begin to eliminate the pledging process altogether. And in fact, in introducing the new model and the legislation approved by the Ecclesia this summer, Phi Gamma Delta was the 7th men's fraternity to eliminate pledging. Now that spans several decades, but ultimately the 7th men's fraternity to do so. Another factor leading into this Ecclesia, just to be aware of. I think many brothers who've been around a little bit have seen us communicate some and talk about some of the experience we've had with some very highly publicized and very unfortunate incidents in our recent past. Brothers, that led to a very difficult insurance renewal in 2022, and really driven by our claims experience and those incidents which occurred over those last several years. What resulted in that, or some of the numbers that drove it? The realities were going into the 2022 Ecclesia, and prior to that, our 2022 insurance renewal. Phi Gamma Delta's insurers were paying out more than 2 times the amount of dollars in claims paid versus premiums collected. And more than half of those claims were involving new members. At our 22 renewal, just about a year ago, March of 2022, that resulted in a 146% increase in our premium of our general liability policy. It doubled our self-insured retention, or sometimes referred to as our deductible, the amount we pay out of pocket before insurance kicks in, but also resulted in some requirements that we implement changes that address those most significant sources of claims or risk losing coverage altogether. I give you this context because it's important to understand some of the dynamics either that you experienced or maybe heard about going into this ecclesia. Certainly the timing of our full introduction and introduction of fraternity laws to implement our new model was certainly driven by the timeline of what was put in place by our insurers. We were required to show some changes given those claims experiences that we had. I do want to emphasize, though, that this new model, the basis of it all, has been in development for several years, well before those insurer requirements. So I've been referencing this new model, and I want to take a few minutes just to really help you understand what it is, or maybe more importantly, what it isn't. With the new model to build courageous leaders, we are focused on the future. In its development, we recognize the need to find, pilot, and deploy innovative ways of becoming a FIGAM so that we could work to eliminate hazing, strengthen the fraternity with a smart growth philosophy, and ultimately enhance the undergraduate experience for many, many years to come. Now, this new model seeks to do several things. First and foremost, it seeks to put a greater emphasis on quality, values-based recruitment to both identify and attract good fraternity men, whether or not they would typically avail themselves during formal rush. It also seeks to shift the mindset so that initiation is really the beginning of a man's Phi Gamma Delta journey and not the goal simply of making it through pledgeship. Very importantly, brother, through it, we seek to better assimilate and engage brothers throughout their undergraduate experience, which we believe will ultimately lead to better engagement as graduates. And of course, through the new model, we seek to reduce the power dynamics associated with traditional pledging and those that are ultimately at the heart of hazing. Now, brothers, we have to recognize that hazing is a societal problem that extends well beyond fraternities. In fact, research suggests that 50% of men have experienced hazing before coming to college, bringing with them certain expectations that can linger on. We've got to admit that the elimination of pledging is not the panacea for the elimination of hazing. However, combined with continued educational efforts and continued accountability, we believe that is one of the most significant steps we can take in our work to ultimately prevent it. The new model is actually an overarching term and is the product of two programs which create a holistic approach and a better experience for all of our brothers. Using what we call the growth system, chapters will recruit men who embrace the values of Phi Gamma Delta and aspire to be courageous leaders. Through the other component called Built to Lead, we will give our brothers the tools for courageous leadership, provide them a more fulfilling undergraduate experience, and ultimately seek to prepare them for future success. Diving in a little bit deeper, let's start with the growth system. The growth system is a modern recruitment approach, which at the same time approaches the bringing in of new members as we did for the first of more than 75 years. Pledging did not always exist in Phi Gamma Delta. In fact, the pledging status on its own did not take shape or did not exist in our laws until the early 1920s. As we found through some of our research, really pledging as we understand it today even took a little bit longer to materialize, not showing up in a widespread way until about the early to mid 1940s. Through the growth system, we're taking our time. We're taking our time, more time than is allotted in formal rush on campuses today, to give a full and honest evaluation of a man before we invite him to join. That way our brothers can feel confident when they invite him to join, they really mean that they want him to join as a brother. Through the growth system, we're slowing down recruitment. We're slowing down recruitment to really allow our brothers and giving them the tactics to do so by allowing them to get to know those men and making that full evaluation instead of that rushed period where you've got to weed them out later. The growth system has several significant components to it. First, through education, we seek to teach our undergraduates how to best build relationships, evaluate potential members, and develop a plan that works both for them and their campuses. Taking into account some of the unique dynamics that exist on every campus, helping them develop a plan where they can really work to achieve the heart of the growth system and really work to know men well, while understanding that it may not work the same way on every single campus. The growth system also uses technology. We leverage technology and tools available which help chapters to better organize those efforts, better communicate with prospective members, and ultimately make an evaluation based on set joining standards, forcing that proposition in the bid process, if you will, and as a chapter extends an invitation for membership. And certainly a significant component of the growth system is through support of our graduate brothers to both advise and mentor brothers in the chapter to help keep them honest in the process and help them stay on the right path, adhering to their joining standards and making sure that they are comfortable with the men that they're bringing in. So again, I want to emphasize what this means is that in this shift to the new model and the recruitment component of it all, we were taking more time. We were taking a lot more time to evaluate a man, not just taking the approach of seeing who shows up and figuring out later, oftentimes done through pledge education. It's really taking the time of evaluation and making sure that that happens at the onset as opposed to a future thought. But brothers, the new model is a holistic approach. It's beyond just how we recruit men. It's also about how we support them throughout their undergraduate careers. And that's where Built to Lead comes in. Built to Lead is a multi-level development experience that begins on day one of affiliation and extends throughout the undergraduate experience. It focuses on building and strengthening those skills necessary for courageous leaders. What's important to note is that it really extends learning about the fraternity beyond what has typically been just the first 4 or 6 or 8 weeks to help brothers really know and appreciate our history, really know and understand and appreciate our values and expectations and our traditions, and also really appreciate our ritual, have a better understanding of what it really means instead of just memorizing key facts or taking tests to prove a brother's worth at the end of a pledgeship. Built to Lead begins with level 1. I should mention at the onset, Built to Lead is a multi-level program. I'll describe those here. So beginning at level 1, that's where brothers have shared experiences to develop bonds. They acclimate to fraternity life and begin to understand the positive impact and power of fraternity. If you would really compare level 1 of Built to Lead and some of the very pure aims of new member education, you'll see that they're very synonymous. It's just the timing of them and when it takes place. Level 1 is all about an orientation period. It's about acclimating a brother to the chapter and the brothers in it and helping him really understand who he is and what the chapter is about and how he can best contribute. Built to Lead continues with level 2, where brothers begin to put that courageous leadership framework into action as they take on leadership roles. It's more experiential, right? This is all the while we continue to take a deeper dive into the meaning of our ritual and values and ultimately develop skills that will help brothers later in life. As brothers near graduation, they begin to move on to what we call level 3, where they begin to pass along that knowledge and the lessons learned through mentorship and to apply those courageous leadership concepts outside the fraternity vernacular. This is where brothers really sharpen their skills to give them an edge on career and life. So brothers, the new model does not abandon education and learning. In fact, it embraces it, and it makes it a significant part of how a chapter operates. It focuses on the whole chapter, not just a pledge class, and works to provide brothers with opportunities and skills that fit them where they are in their undergraduate careers, all to help show the continued value of fraternity throughout their experience. So that's a lot to absorb. And maybe the best place to go is to say, well, how are we doing it? How are we doing it? Well, how is implementation looking? How is it working? What's expected to come next? Well, brothers, from the onset, we knew that making changes to our laws would be challenging, but certainly implementation of those changes, implementation of the new model would be the most important factor to our success. Recognizing that a change in such long-standing practices can be difficult, the Fraternity and Educational Foundation have committed considerable resources to help our undergraduate chapters significantly implement this new model. In passing amendments to our laws, the 174th Ecclesia set a 2-year implementation window, giving undergraduate chapters time to plan and adjust. On a very tactical level, this is rolled out through what we're calling early adopters. Those chapters which implement the new model prior to the required date and assist the fraternity in providing feedback, which continues to shape and refine our programs and benefit all chapters going forward. Early adopters are important in this. They're very important in this, and because of that, they have an opportunity to receive some benefits and resources aimed to really assist them in implementation. First, early adopters have access to scholarship funds provided by the Educational Foundation. They have access to funds of up to $5,000 per year to help them to attract and recruit good quality men of character, and those who share our value. Why is this important? Well, again, Phi Gamma Delta knows this somewhat anecdotally, that this is a mechanism that has worked well for us in certain cases, whether it be expansion prospects or some campus or some chapters rather use scholarships in a similar way. The anecdotal evidence says it really does help bring some men out who may not have otherwise considered joining. But we also have some good information that our peers have shared with us, some good data that says really the men who are identified in this scholarship process really turn out to be good prospects and do a really good job to embody our values, and essentially are the kind of men we want to find, but may not have been able to through other means. Another significant benefit is chapters are eligible to receive implementation grants, or what we're calling Built to Lead grants. These are grants that are available to help them offset the costs of programming and really to help spur their creativity. Now, don't get me wrong, Built to Lead is a member development framework which was never intended to be to come at a huge financial investment by a chapter. There's a lot that a chapter can do within that framework that costs little to no money, but the grants are there to help them to try some new things. They're there to take some of the roadblocks out of the way to try in something new and ultimately help them be successful in their overall implementation. Early adopters also see some additional benefit by way of having some of their travel costs covered to attend certain fraternity events, which really focus on learning these new recruitment techniques, certain leadership training events and programs, different pieces which help them to better learn and understand the new model and the programs underneath of it. And certainly early adopters are eligible for some significant incentives which are tied to their annual insurance billing. Chapters which are early adopters and meet criteria which is set in an agreement from the onset can earn up to a 50% discount on their insurance assessment when that's combined with some existing programming incentives. So some of those incentives again exist today by way of some of our health and safety education program and certain other programming completion. When you factor all those things together, an early adopter can cut its rate in half from what it would be charged otherwise. But otherwise, brothers, and perhaps most significant, the early adopter option means that chapters do not have to make this change overnight. They can begin to plan and make their own transitions, and they can do so with a lot of help. Early adopters are not left on the island to figure it out. Each chapter is assigned what we call a coach. That's either a staff member or an independent contractor who's trained by the fraternity, who works with the chapter for a semester or more to do several things. First and foremost, they're there to work with the chapter for weeks and months to develop a customized implementation plan, to take the framework of the new model and those two accompanying programs and develop a plan for how the chapter is going to implement it, given some best practices of other groups and on other campuses. The coaches are also there to help introduce and familiarize both chapter leaders and advisors to the programming and resources available to them. Right, it's certainly a learning process and a lot of new information coming at both chapters and advisors. So the coach is there to help them understand everything that's there and help teach them some of the basics as they get started. Now, subtly, coaches are also starting to make that handoff to our chapter advisors who can advise on these processes after the coaching is finished. Our coaches are also there to help collaborate with the chapter and kind of bring everybody together on the campus. Sometimes that's the university itself, university staff, sometimes that's the IFC, sometimes that's both, to navigate some local policies, procedures, or perceived roadblocks to implementing some of the requirements in the new model. What we've found thus far is that a lot of those roadblocks really are perceived. And when you dig into it, you're talking about how chapters tend to operate, particularly by way of recruitment on a campus, not necessarily policies that are in place forbidding certain things. Coaches are also there to certainly provide a lot of continued support throughout execution, and to give them feedback and to receive and collect feedback on behalf of the fraternity, which ultimately shapes how we implement going forward. So how have we done so far, right? How have we done so far? We have a full semester plus about a month under our belts today. And I'm very pleased to say that overall, I am very pleased with implementation thus far. This fall, we had 32 chapters. 32 chapters raised their hands and asked and agreed to be those early adopters. And those chapters began implementing the new model right away. Now, given the quick nature of things coming together, the collegiate was in the second week of August, many campuses starting in late August. There was a quick turnaround. And so I will tell you that not every one of those 32 chapters is really fully implemented and ready to go. About half of those groups, I would say, are fully there. The other half continue to receive coaching this spring. But some of the things we started to see from those groups and some of the insights that we gained. One, this was the first chance where chapters were beginning to leverage those available scholarships and grant money. And thus far, the feedback has been positive on those, although admittedly, those came at a little bit of a slower rollout than other pieces. An interesting data point we've been able to pull out, and we're pulling out a lot of data points every day, it seems, but one of the most interesting of the early adopters, of the fall early adopters, those who were fully implemented saw an 18% increase of initiates compared to their 4-year average. An 18% increase of initiates compared to their prior 4-year average. Beyond just bringing men in, the anecdotal evidence that we're starting to see is that there's some significant signs that they're doing a better job at retaining them as well. There's some outliers in that, of course. Some chapters have done very well with the new model, and I think had some great experiences in identifying some men who said themselves, there's no way I would have joined a fraternity if not for this approach. And there's some who are struggling and kind of recasting the net a little bit, but we are seeing some positives here. And I think, another big positive that we're seeing a very positive reception from our campuses themselves, as well as the members involved. There's a lot of good buzz, if you will, around the new model, and a lot of support available from a lot of people as the fraternity continues forward. We've got to ask ourselves, in our first several months, what have we learned? I think most important and most critical, maybe something we knew but didn't realize how important it was. Advisors are crucial in successful adoption of the new model. Advisors are crucial in this adoption. Graduates are crucial in supporting this adoption. As we begin to work with chapters, one of the best practices we've identified is really identifying at least 3 brothers, typically 3 board of chapter advisor type roles that are really focused on the implementation. One BCA advisor really focused on the recruitment element. The other 2 really focused on different elements of that Built to Lead program, really guiding the chapter leaders, and working with those coaches as they begin to roll it out. The other thing we learned, or maybe the other action we took, is maybe the better way to put it. I mentioned there were 32 early adopters. Well, I should share with you that is way more interest than we anticipated from the onset. Way more. In fact, about 4-fold the interest that we anticipated we would see this fall. So what that meant is that we had to accelerate some plans to get some help brought on. Coaches this fall were primarily fraternity staff members who we repurposed a lot of roles to provide the support that those 32 early adopters needed. But we had to bring in some additional help. So we have brought in and onboarded 17 coaches to begin working with chapters this spring. Those are outside parties, independent contractors, a mix of both brothers and friends of the fraternity, some that work on campuses, some that don't, but those whom we've been able to train and prepare and ultimately feel comfortable working with our chapters going forward to help them find success. We're also finding some success with chapters in holding multiple initiation ceremonies, which really supports the continuous recruitment model. Right? I think maybe a perception off the bat is, we're used to doing one initiation ceremony, maybe a semester, in some cases a year, but chapters have been pretty successful in starting to hold multiple ceremonies and really support that idea of recruitment happens year round. It doesn't just happen in these 1 or 2 clusters that we might have in the course of a year. And chapters are starting to figure it out, and they're starting to give some best practice to help others do the same. And of course, we had to learn a little bit about ourselves. We've had to make some internal adjustments to how we're administering our scholarship and grant processes. Hopefully those have been smoothed out, and our chapters going forward are going to experience those a little bit quicker pace, be able to put those to work a little bit more quickly. As we think about the future and the fraternity's implementation plan going forward, know that the plan is that those early adopters continue. In fact, an early adopter is described as any chapter who adopts this model prior to the required implementation date of July 1st, 2024. So early adopters will continue each academic term over the next year and a half. I'll say that thus far in spring 2023, we've added an additional about 30 chapters. Now I say about because we have chapters that are beginning to work with coaches. We do ask for an agreement with them and certain ends of the bargain that they agree to hold up to in order to receive those benefits. So we're waiting to get the paperwork back, if you will, still on a few, but we expect about another 30 chapters. So putting us at 62 chapters by the end of this first year. That's significant. That's significant. That's more than 40% of our chapters, well beyond what we anticipated in year one. And I should also note that those are, in many ways, not every case, but in many ways, those are still the chapters who are coming to us. As we go forward, our plan, our intention is to recruit and engage at least an additional 50 to 60 chapters over the course of the next academic year for implementation in fall 2023 and spring 2024, such that by the time we reach fall of 24 or the first academic semester after the elimination of pledging is required, we're positioned to continue to support those chapters who need to make that conversion, who will still receive the same amount of coaching support, but in not doing so early, they're not going to receive the benefits of those early adopters. So brothers, I've mentioned a lot about this, and it dawns on me that I've not actually given you some place to go look and learn more on your own, because there's a lot of information that we have available and you might have started to pick up on. I would encourage you to visit www.phigam.org/new model, which is a kind of our landing page, both to tell our story and to share all the resources around what the new model has to hold and how it can work for a chapter. Brothers, the amendments that were passed by this last ecclesia, the 174th ecclesia, and the new model represent a needed adaptation that recognizes the changing world around us. I think I've pointed out to you some significant changes and potential headwinds that we see coming, and there's an adaptation that certainly needs to occur. But I do want to make one point and emphasize a real possibility here. The new model for building courageous leaders is not about surviving. It's about thriving in tomorrow's world. Why do I say that? Because despite some of the enrollment challenges that we might seek, some of the behavioral issues that we've seen over time, here's what we're beginning to learn through some research that the fraternity gathers with its interfraternal friends. First and foremost, college men need fraternity now more than ever. Excuse me. College men need fraternity now more than ever. While college men are experiencing loneliness and depression, pardon me, let me try that again. While college men are experiencing loneliness and depression at increasing rates, fraternities empower students to create a strong support system. This family, this home that fraternities provide offers help and guidance when a member needs it most. Some salient points from the research, right? What the scholarly research suggests. Fraternity men experience higher levels of positive mental health. They are more likely to seek help when they need it, and they are in an environment where brothers can have tough conversations and receive support from others more so than their non-affiliated peers. I think we've all seen maybe a little bit of insight to this, and maybe we've seen some studies, we've heard some anecdotal stories, maybe some of us experience this on a daily basis, but there is a looming and growing mental health crisis, and college-age men are at the heart of it. Fraternity really does offer a way to help combat some of those challenges and really offers a good opportunity and mechanism for men to get the support that they need when they need it. As I said before, we also recognize that students today are looking to a value proposition, right? We've got to be able to show them what the fraternity what the fraternity experience is really worth for them. Well, fraternities are a proven accelerator for success, both in college and beyond. We estimate that students spend more than 90% of their time outside the classroom. Fraternities capitalize on those hours by preparing men for success in college and in their futures far beyond what their peers experience. Again, a few elements of the research that support this. Data suggests that 83% of fraternity men have a higher leadership confidence as a result of their membership in a fraternity. Fraternity men have higher learning gains in their first year of college compared to their non-affiliated peers. They're 2 times more likely to feel prepared for life after college, and they find jobs more quickly. Some of this data is gathered by Gallup, which is commissioned a study which has been repeated a couple times, and it really looks at the post-graduation impact of fraternity. In Gallup's study, and its measures year over year, fraternity men are more likely to be thriving in every aspect of well-being measured. That includes career, community, financial, physical, and social well-being. Controlling for everything else Gallup can possibly control for, fraternity men are more likely to be thriving in every one of those elements than their non-affiliated peers. I think that's a pretty significant value proposition. We've also got to consider that colleges and universities today also need to see the value that fraternity adds. You know, we can talk a lot about what we add, what we do, but again, we're starting to get some of the data, some of the numbers that prove it. We know that fraternity membership connects men to the university in a way that non-members simply don't experience. Overall, they're more satisfied as both as students and as alumni, right? Again, the data points. Unequivocally, fraternity alumni feel a deeper sense of self-loyalty, a deeper sense of loyalty to their alma mater, and they're more likely to donate and recommend their school to others. They're more involved in co-curricular activities. They're more connected to their campuses and communities. And I think highly important for today's world and tomorrow's world as colleges and universities face enrollment challenges, fraternity members experience stronger retention and persistence to graduation than their non-affiliated peers. Brothers, I tell you all this because it's good information to know. It's good information to have. It's good information to reinforce why we're doing the things we're doing. Because I think we've got to recognize that now is our opportunity to adjust, to prepare, and ultimately to thrive, as Phi Gamma Delta has done many, many times throughout our 175-year history. So brothers, while our primary focus in the next 18 months is implementation of the new model and continue to build that infrastructure for our undergraduate chapters to thrive, I want to let you know about another area of significant focus that the Archons and I and the staff and many, many others are focusing on today. And that is, put simply, the volunteer structure which supports all this work. We've said for many, many years, right? The key to successful chapter long-term is the graduate support. It's the continuity it provides. But I think with the changes that the fraternity is facing, with the priorities that we have now and in the future, with the change in demographics, not just on our campuses, but within our own graduates, and how volunteerism has changed over the last several years, the last several decades, we decided that it's time to take a significant look at everything everything to do with our volunteers to best situate both them and our brothers. So today, brothers, we're working to both best position and equip our graduate brothers to live out that motto of not being not for college days alone. In that, we're taking a few steps right now, and some of you might be involved in this. Some of you might hear some of this as we're trying to get some information, but we're currently evaluating our current volunteer advisory structure, the roles associated with it, the responsibilities associated with those roles, and the expectations that we set for those brothers, ultimately to make sure that we are doing the best we can, again, both to support our undergraduate chapters and to match the changing trends that we see in volunteerism and how and when brothers are willing and able to give their time. We're also working to bolster our training and resources to support those in roles similar to yours in advisory roles and within our house corporations, and certainly to help reinforce and assist the best that we can the important work that you do. I mentioned some numbers, right? I mentioned some numbers before. Let me throw them at you again. Phi Gamma Delta today has more, close to, and by the end of the year, we'll have more than 9,000 undergraduate brothers. The fraternity staff is comprised of less than 30, though very hardworking, less than 30 hardworking men and women to support those men. We rely on the more than 2,000 brothers out there, the more than 2,000 graduate volunteers to help us support those chapters. I appreciate your loyalty and your dedication to our fraternity and the work that you're doing to support housing for undergraduates in Phi Gamma Delta. It's important. I hope you find great value in it. I hope you will come to us and let us know how we can best support you through it, and ultimately know that we're all working together to make Phi Gamma Delta as great as we can and best position us both for now and for the future. Brothers, thank you again for attending the Housing Conference this year. I hope you have an enjoyable and productive day. I'm mighty proud to be a Fiji.
Brothers, there was a lot of information in Rob's speech. Due to timing, I will ask if you do have questions on the new model or any information that Rob covered during his discussion, please write them down, save them for the end, for the closing session, and we'll take some time to address them and have an open discussion at that time. Now, brothers, without further ado, I do want to take a moment and introduce, I know John's alluded to it, and the work that the foundation does, but I want to take a moment to introduce you to and welcome Ben Robinson, Executive Director of the Phi Gamma Delta Educational Foundation. Take some time to discuss the role of the foundation and the implications it could have for your house corporation.
Hey, thanks, Dio. Hello, brothers. I've scrolled through to see who's attending, so I know a lot of names and faces. It's good to see you. And there's some brothers that we may not have had a chance to meet, so hopefully we'll get a chance to do that down the road. And John Zizza had asked me to just speak briefly about some things that the foundation does that could help your house corporation to maintain or construct or renovate parts of your chapter house. And so what I want to spend time just explaining at a very high level what our chapter house educational fund, that's called CHEF, C-H-E-F, chapter house educational fund does and how we operate it. It's a service that we provide for house corporations who are planning to either construct, renovate, or maintain educational space in their chapter house. And it's restricted to educational space because as a charity, that's all that we can do for housing. But over the years, we have the industry, if you will, the Greek community industry has been really pretty good about going in and trying to figure out what does that mean when it comes to the design of and the construction of that educational space. And the program is really set up so that if you are planning to build chapter housing, if you're planning to renovate some of the space that you have, or if you're going to maintain educational space that you have on an annual basis, the foundation will accept gifts from graduate brothers. That's the majority of where the money comes from, but we'll accept a gift from basically anywhere. And you may designate that the donor may designate that gift to your chapter's CHEF account, and then we hold it until the house corporation has figured out or completed its design or remodel for that educational space. And then on the backside, there's a lot of detail and a lot of paperwork. We're not going to get into that today, but there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to document and to figure out what's educational in nature so that we could grant that money back to the house corporation for those projects. And because there's, and I think Dio's got a link on our website that he can share with you if he hadn't already. If you go in and begin to just look at some of that detail, if you've got a project coming up, the first thing I'd recommend is go see that first, because that might answer some questions. And then if we need to chat later to kind of drill down on some of the data and maybe even figure out who figure out who some of your donors may be. I think there's a session later for that, but the foundation's there to help offer some services that might make the project a little easier. Anytime you get into a building project, it isn't easy. Okay. So first thing, anybody who's done it, and even a renovation project can be tough, but the goal is to try to involve graduate brothers who have the means to make, substantial gifts for your project. And for some of them, they may need a deduction. Obviously, there are a lot of brothers who can give that don't need a deduction, and they should give to the House Corporation. But the foundation's there to try to help you get through that process a little bit. And so, Dio, I guess I'm gonna leave it at that for now. But just know that if you're out there, check out some of the information, and then if we need to chat, we can certainly get on the phone and work through some of the detail as you're thinking about those projects. So, if you want to open it up for questions or whatever, we can, or if y'all need to move on, I understand, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Ben, I'll throw your email into the chat as well. If brothers do have questions and want to follow up directly, brothers, you can either email housing@phigam.org or email Ben at the email I'm typing in the chat right now. Thank you again, Ben, for taking some time to be with us this afternoon. Brothers, as we continue on, I do want to take a moment, introduce and welcome Kevin Mitchelson, former general counsel for the fraternity, and Phi Gamma Delta's current representative for the Fraternity and Sorority Political Action Committee.
Good afternoon, brothers. I'm pleased to be with you. You want to go to the next screen, Dio? Yeah, good. When John asked me to do, am I coming off okay? Got it. When John asked me to do this, it sounded simple. I was going to be at my desk and no technological issues, but as it turns out, Fran and I are in Kansas City for a funeral. And so I'm sitting in a car in a parking lot, and hopefully you can hear me okay. My contact information is on that first screen. Dio will have it. And at some point, Dio is going to provide me your contact information, and I will contact each of you by email about the work of the Fraternity and Sorority Political Action Committee. As Dio said, it's my honor to represent our fraternity on the Political Action Committee board. And I want to tell you a little bit about the work of the Political Action Committee. I also would tell you that Pi Deuteron, our chapter, and I co-chaired the effort, recently did about a $2.5 million renovation, and everything Ben said about using the CHEF funds at the Educational Foundation is definitely the way to go. And I encourage you to do that. My goal today, frankly, is to get into your pocket a little bit in hopes that the Political Action Committee can help put money back into your pocket in a way, hopefully in some big ways. Dio, go to the next slide. And let me just ask you a couple questions about how would it affect your house corporation if any of these things happened? If a student was denied a scholarship because he was a member of a Greek organization, a member of our fraternity. If our membership base declined significantly because of deferred recruitment. I know in my own chapter and many of our chapters, we recruit people coming out of high school and they move in as freshmen. Deferred recruitment would significantly change that whole, the way we operate entirely. Or worse yet, as some university administrations have tried to do, you received an email from the fraternity sorority advisor or the vice president for student affairs saying that the Greek community is being abolished on the campus. Go ahead, Dio. So these are things that actually are happening across the country. You all know Abolish Greek Life. I think you know what happened at Harvard, where Harvard said that Harvard would not support any member of a single sex organization. That meant you couldn't be a team captain on an athletic team. The university wouldn't sponsor you for a Rhodes Scholarship or any, Fulbright or any of those things. And anyway, that led to a lot of litigation. These things start on private colleges. And then of course they move to the public universities. And so as a movement, the fraternities and sororities are coalescing to try to address these threats to the Greek community. Go ahead, Dio. So how can we respond? What can a house corporation do? And why am I talking to you today? At the campus level, most of the fights involve zoning, where the university ties zoning, where we're grandfathered in to the existence of university recognition of the fraternity. That's a problem at the University of Kansas for all of the major fraternities. At the national and international level, we're banding together, and then through this coalition called the Fraternal Governmental Relations Coalition, which is an organization formed by the North American Interfraternity Council, which of course we're represented by Buddy Cote on that, the National Panhellenic Council, to coordinate these various efforts. And I want to tell you just real quickly a little bit about that. So the Fraternity Sorority Political Action Committee exists to provide financial support to members of Congress, and in some cases state legislators, but primarily the United States House of Representatives and the US Senate, who support the issues and are promoting legislation that's favorable to fraternities and sororities. And the FRGC every year has a day on the Hill where we bring students, university men and women, some FIGAMs, and we go to lobby those individual congressmen and senators about our priorities. Dio, go to the next slide, legislative priorities. Let's talk about what specifically we're talking about, because that's what you might be interested in. So the first is the College Affordability Act in higher education. That's part of the higher education reauthorization. We're always fighting for legislation that makes higher education more affordable for our undergraduate brothers. The second one is the Collegiate Freedom of Association Act. And that's a real important bill that I think has good chances in the coming year. It basically, because of the things that have happened to shut down the Greek life on campuses, it's to preserve student choice in the organizations that a young man or young woman wants to join. It's to protect our single-sex organization status. It's to provide equal treatment for organizations on the campus, especially with respect to the selection of our members and the discipline of our members, the discipline of our chapters, and the discipline in some cases where an entire Greek system would be suspended because of the wrongful conduct of one individual person. The educational notification and disclosure of actions risking loss of life is a long way to say the End All Hazing Act is another legislative priority for us. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about hazing, but I would tell you that that is a joint effort of the Anti-Hazing Coalition, which is made up of the North American Interfraternity Conference, the National Panhellenic Conference, and the parents of the young men who have died as a result of hazing accidents. And you all have heard of Tim Piazza, Matt Groover, Marquis Brown, Nikki Cumberland, Dalton Debrick, Harrison Kowiak, and I always want to make sure we never forget our own Scott Kruger at MIT all those years ago in 1997. But most importantly to the house corporations, and the reason that I wanted a minute to visit with you today, is the Collegiate Housing and Infrastructure Act, CHIA. You know that we are the second largest provider of collegiate housing. And the goal of CHIA is to make contributions to a house corporation, directly to a house corporation, tax deductible. As Ben said a minute ago, when we have these capital campaigns at our chapters, it's vitally important that brothers give money directly to the house corporation to be able to make the improvements in our chapter houses that are not specifically educational, that can't be paid for through a CHEF account at the Educational Foundation. But Chia, if we can get it through, and it's been offered, it's come through the House, we've got to keep pushing. I think we keep hoping this may be the year we get there. It's got to be part of the tax bill, but that would make all of our contributions directly to our house corporation tax deductible, and therefore allow your house corporation, our house corporations across the country, to be competitive with other not-for-profit housing. And finally, the other thing that's important locally is dealing with public accommodation and zoning laws. And that's one of the things that the Fraternity Sorority Political Action Committee does. And let me tell you how we do that. I've already talked about the Day on the Hill, where our undergraduates come and lobby the Congress. That's going to happen in April. It's going to be in person this year. Dio, go to the next screen. So what can I do? What am we asking for each of you to do? There will be opportunities to contact your representative and senators and ask them to support our causes, support the bills as they're coming through committee and as they come to the floor. And if you have a specific relationship with one of those persons, I'd like you to let me know, because we'll specifically enlist your assistance in doing that. Every year, we have to raise money to continue to have a seat on the board. For Phi Gamma Delta to have a seat on the board of the PAC, we have to raise over $6,000. So every year, a number of you have already gotten and will get an email from me, and you'll get contact from the Political Action Committee asking for your support. And we get support from brothers, individual donors, and I'm glad to have any contribution. We've got brothers who give $10. We've got brothers who give $1,000. We've got one brother who gives $5,000 every other year. So we need your financial support to make these things happen. And I would ask you, if you're in a position to do so, to give individually. But my purpose for visiting with you today is to ask for your house corporation to support the work of the Fraternity Sorority Action Fund. That's part of the PAC. That's the group that funds advocacy and litigation when necessary. That's the group that raised the $4 million for the lawsuit to beat Harvard when they tried to ban single-sex organizations at Harvard University. And that would have just opened the floodgates across the country if we hadn't won that lawsuit. It was a huge win for the Greek system. But it's going to take more funds to continue these ongoing challenges, to fight for our constitutional right of freedom of association, to fight any of these Harvard-type litigation, to fight the abolish group life movement that spreads across the country, and to deal with zoning challenges as they happen campus by campus by campus across the country. 3 years ago, Phi Gamma Delta made a significant cash commitment to the Action Fund to help fund that Harvard litigation, and a number of our brothers stepped up. But my purpose today is to ask you in your house corporation budget to consider budgeting $500 a year out of your house corporation budget to the Action Fund, so that we're in a position to help you fight locally, and that we're in a position to fund the litigation nationally to protect the interests of the fraternities and sororities across the country. If you would do that, then that's really what we're all about. As I said, then we'll continue to push to get Chia passed. We'll continue to fight where the Greek system is under challenge. And that's really what I've got. And that's my request. And I hope you will consider it. And I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, John, for the invitation to be with you all today. And I'll be glad to get emails or phone calls from any of you and talk about the work of the Fraternity Sorority PAC going forward. And I thank you for your time today, brothers. Mighty proud.
Thank you, Kevin. Now, brothers, as we continue our program, we are going to add at least 5 minutes back to the session and kind of push the schedule back 5 minutes each. So we'll just adjust accordingly. But I appreciate your involvement for our welcoming session. Our next session is how to mitigate risk as a house corporation with Holmes Murphy. So please utilize your conference program to access those links If we have any further technical difficulties, brothers, I'll send out an email with updates, but we should be good to go for the rest of the program. So I'll see you in, as we begin our educational sessions, each one will have its own individual link in the housing conference program. So again, thank you, brothers, and we'll see you in the next session.